Christmas morning, 2008. Northern Ireland was glowing with joy, streets filled with lights, laughter, and the sound of kids tearing open presents. But inside one quiet house, the Christmas spirit was dead. That house belonged to Mary Ranklin. As the morning went on, her family started to worry. No calls, no sound, nothing. Just a strange, heavy silence behind her walls. So her brother-in-law, Arthur, decided to check on her. He rang the bell. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. He sighed, pulled out a spare key, turned it slowly, and the moment he stepped inside, he froze. The place was a mess. Furniture knocked over. Christmas lights ripped and hanging. Wrapping paper scattered across the floor. And that silence. It felt like even the air had stopped moving. Right then, Arthur knew something terrible had happened to Mary. Within hours, her home turned into a full-blown crime scene. Neighbors who'd shared smiles and dinners for years suddenly started looking at each other with fear. But what really happened inside that house? Who turned a night of peace into a nightmare? This wasn't just a murder. It was a mystery that shattered the spirit of Christmas and haunted an entire community. If you just stumbled on our story by chance, welcome. Here, you'll find thrilling, mysterious, and strange stories from all around the world. Subscribe and be part of the journey. And now, let's enjoy the details that make the story. The story begins in Northern Ireland, in the city of Newry, along Dublin Road, one of the most elegant and expensive neighborhoods in town. The houses there had that rare blend of old, classic charm mixed with sleek, modern style. It was a place where neighbors knew each other well, visited often, and lived like one big, extended family. This neighborhood was famous for its peace and safety. Crime, break-ins, they were practically unheard of. People trusted their surroundings so much. Many of them didn't even bother locking their front doors. That's how safe and upscale the place was. And right in the middle of those homes stood number 39, the home of grandmother Mary Ranklin. She was 81 years old, yet she was considered the jewel of the neighborhood, the kind, gentle soul everyone loved. Mary was known for her warmth. She adored children, welcomed them close, until every kid on the street felt like she was part of their own family. And her real family was just as big. She had 8 children, all grown up and married, and from them came 7 grandchildren who loved and respected her deeply. When her kids eventually moved out of the big family house, Mary stayed behind, living alone, but never lonely. She filled her days tending to her garden and flowers, caring for her looks and her health, keeping up with her skin, her hair, like a woman who never stopped valuing herself, no matter her age. But Mary wasn't just about taking care of herself. She was the heartbeat of the community. No party or celebration felt complete without her presence. Every holiday, she was the first to bring gifts, cards, and warm wishes to her neighbors, just as she did for her own family. She lived a life full of gratitude and joy, spreading happiness to everyone around her with her smile and her kindness. But all of that changed. On Christmas Day, Thursday, December 25th, 2008. That was the day Mary Ranklin's name transformed from a symbol of warmth and joy into a chilling memory for everyone who knew her. Just a few days before Christmas, she caught a nasty cold. At her age, it hit her hard. Too weak to travel, she couldn't go to her daughter Brenda's house to prepare for the holiday. The illness drained her, but she stayed hopeful. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, At exactly 10:38 p.m., Mary picked up the phone and called Brenda. Her voice sounded tired, yet reassuring. "I'm all right, love. I'm starting to feel a little better. Tomorrow I'll be stronger, and I want you to come get me so I can spend Christmas with you." Brenda, worried about her mom, offered to stay with her that night. But Mary refused. She insisted that Brenda and the rest of the family stay with their kids, enjoy the evening, and not trouble themselves with coming over. She promised she was fine, and said tomorrow would be even better when they all gathered together. And so, that night, for the very first time, Mary spent Christmas Eve completely alone. What she believed would be just another quiet night turned out to be the very last night she would ever spend alive. The next morning, Friday, December 26th, 2008. Brenda, Mary's daughter, waited for her mother's call, just like they had agreed the night before. Time passed, but the phone never rang. At exactly 9:47 a.m., Brenda picked up her phone and dialed her mom, asking when she wanted to be picked up. But no answer. She thought maybe her mother was in the bathroom or getting dressed. She tried again, still nothing. A third time. Silence. That's when worry began to eat her alive. Had her mom's illness gotten worse? Had she fainted? Fallen in the bathroom? Brenda couldn't wait any longer. She grabbed her car keys and rushed toward her mother's house. At the same time, Arthur Morgan, her brother-in-law, was also on his way. His wife had tried calling Mary over and over with no luck, and now he was heading there himself. Arthur arrived first, around 10:20 a.m. He rang the bell again and again. No response. He pounded on the door. Nothing. Finally, he pulled out the spare key he kept, slipped it into the lock, and opened the door. The moment he stepped inside, shock hit him. The living room was a disaster. Furniture overturned, Mary's belongings scattered across the floor. But what truly crushed his heart were the Christmas gifts she had carefully wrapped for her grandchildren. They were torn apart, ripped open, and thrown everywhere, as if someone had destroyed them on purpose. Fear took over. He ran upstairs, climbing the steps in a rush. As he went up, he saw shredded decorations, broken vases, more chaos. And then he reached Mary's bedroom. The sight froze him in place. The room was completely wrecked, everything in shambles. And on the floor, beside the bed, lay Mary, motionless, naked, covered only halfway by a sheet tossed over her lower body. Arthur rushed to her side, checking for a pulse. Nothing. He tried CPR, blew air into her lungs, pressed against her chest. But it was too late. Mary was gone. That's when Brenda arrived. She ran straight upstairs, but Arthur stopped her, shouting in desperation, "She's gone! Your mother is gone!" He didn't want her to see her mom in such a horrific state. But a daughter's heart doesn't accept that easily. Brenda pushed past, grabbed her phone with shaking hands, called 911, then fell to her knees, trying to revive her mother herself, sobbing, screaming, refusing to believe this was real. Brenda had never even imagined this could be murder. She thought maybe the cold had gotten worse. Maybe her mom had fainted or hit her head. Normal things. Things that happened to someone her age. But when she stepped into that room, reality hit her like a nightmare. Her voice in that 911 call captured her shock, her disbelief. Mary's body was brutalized in ways no one was prepared to see. Her skull was fractured from vicious blows to the head. 16 of her ribs were broken. Her hands, her face, her body, covered in bruises. Her hair had been ripped and torn straight from her scalp, The scene was so gruesome, even seasoned police officers struggled to process it. At 11:14 a.m., the police arrived. One look at the room, and they knew instantly. This was no natural death. This was murder. A savage one. The house was cleared out, sealed with yellow tape. The investigation began, and what they uncovered was beyond disturbing. The murder weapon was a massive crucifix, about 2 feet long. It had hung above Mary's bed for years, a gift to her late husband. The killer ripped it from the wall and first pressed it against her chin, leaving a deep imprint of the crown of thorns, then used it to bludgeon her with such violence that the crucifix itself snapped in half. Why that weapon? Out of all the objects in the room, why the cross? Her nightdress, the one she had been wearing that evening, was missing. Gone, as if the killer deliberately took it with them. The back door. Police noticed it opened onto a hidden spot, away from the neighbor's view. The perfect escape route. The one the killer likely used to vanish into the night. When the neighbors saw the yellow tape surrounding Mary's home, they were stunned. No one could believe that gentle, sweet woman, over 80 years old, had been murdered. At first, they thought she had fallen, maybe collapsed from illness. Even her own daughter believed that. But the truth was far worse. A brutal killing had shattered the peace of the entire neighborhood. And Mary Ranklin, the woman who had always been the light of Christmas, had become a haunting memory. Her name forever tied to one of the most horrifying crimes Northern Ireland had ever seen. As news of the murder spread, the press in Northern Ireland went wild. Headlines turned Mary's death into something dark and sinister. Some papers claimed that the use of the crucifix wasn't just coincidence, but a message. They painted the killing as a satanic ritual, that Mary had been offered up as a sacrifice. The stripping of her clothes, the blows with the cross. They said it was all part of some dark ceremony. These rumors only fueled the fear. Neighbors were terrified, and pressure on the police grew heavier and heavier. Find the killer, and fast. The police didn't waste time. They formed a special investigation team and began working through possible motives. The first theory? Burglary. It seemed logical. Someone breaks into the house expecting it to be empty, because Mary usually spent Christmas Eve with her family. The intruder finds her inside, panics, ransacks the place, and in a violent rage kills her. The explanation sounded neat. He even ripped open the Christmas presents, only to find children's toys, not valuables. Maybe that was what set him off. But soon, that theory crumbled. Only 2 rooms were destroyed, the living room and Mary's bedroom. The rest of the house was perfectly intact. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken doors, no shattered windows, and most damning of all, Mary's handbag and purse filled with cash sat in plain sight, untouched, not a single coin missing. This wasn't a robbery, which left the investigators staring at the darker possibility. The killer wasn't a stranger. It had to be someone Mary knew, someone she trusted enough to open the door to, or someone close enough to have a spare key. Mary was a wealthy woman, and that meant one uncomfortable possibility. Could someone in her own family have wanted her gone? For her inheritance? It was too big to ignore. So the police turned their focus on her relatives. Every son, every daughter, every in-law was questioned relentlessly. Over and over. They were pushed, pressed, tested. But their stories stayed consistent. No cracks, no contradictions. Slowly, investigators began to lose hope. And then, fate stepped in. One of the detectives was walking through town when she overheard a conversation. A man speaking with unusual interest about Mary's murder. Not a random bystander, but a respected local tax consultant named Richard. Curious, she approached him. "Do you know Mary Ranklin?" she asked. Richard replied calmly. He said he'd visited her a few times, but only with her family present. Never alone. She asked him where he'd been the night of the murder, if he'd seen or heard anything unusual. He denied it all. His answers were cold, detached. And then his wife spoke up. Karen, a successful pharmacist who owned a large, well-known pharmacy on Dublin Road. In a soft, sorrowful voice, she said, "I was with Mary last night. I left her house at 1 a.m. Could it be that I was the last person to see her alive?" That one sentence shifted the entire investigation. The detective knew right then Karen could be the key, the last person to see Mary alive. The police couldn't just let her walk away. They brought her straight to the station. And with that, a whole new chapter of the investigation began. At first, Karen was the very last person anyone thought could be involved. She was wealthy, successful, a respected pharmacist with a thriving business. She had a husband, a young son named James, and a picture-perfect life. Her house in the area wasn't even her main home, just a holiday retreat. She wasn't close to Mary, not really part of the neighborhood. On paper, she looked untouchable. So when police first questioned her, they didn't push hard. They just wanted her version of events. Karen explained that on Christmas Eve she noticed lights still burning in Mary's house. She felt pity. How could an old woman spend such a night alone? So she decided to stop by, to keep her company. She said she carried a bottle of vodka, walked right in through the open door, and found Mary sitting in her chair. The two women drank together, 4 glasses in total. Mary, according to Karen, complained of feeling exhausted, too unwell to even decorate or prepare for the holidays. Karen claimed she tried to convince Mary to come back with her, but Mary refused, saying her daughter would collect her the next morning. And then, Karen said she left. Around 1 a.m., she went home, went to bed, slept until morning. The police noted the time carefully. 1 a.m. That became the anchor point. From then on, every friend, every relative, every neighbor was asked where they had been at that exact moment. Still, no new leads emerged. Until Chief Investigator Garth Talbot decided to play a different card. He walked straight into the neighborhood and addressed the residents with blunt honesty. "Listen, everyone. I won't sugarcoat this. What happened here was a brutal murder. The killer is still out there. And he struck on Christmas Eve right here among you. That means one of you knows something or saw something. And that man or woman is dangerous. So if anyone has even the smallest detail, now is the time to come forward." The statement sent shockwaves through the community. Fear spread like wildfire. And only hours later, a call came in that cracked Karen's story wide open. A neighbor reported that her husband had heard violent shouting that night. When he stepped outside, he saw Karen standing by Mary's garden wall, smoking, while her husband was yelling at her angrily. That testimony destroyed Karen's timeline. Suddenly, she wasn't just a kind visitor with vodka, she was a liar. And then, the inconsistencies piled up. Karen's story kept shifting. Every time she retold it, little details changed, subtle at first, but enough to signal deception. During questioning, she asked obsessively, "Was Mary beaten? Did she die from being hit?" She asked it more than once. even though that detail had never been released to the public. How could she possibly know, unless she was there? There were bruises on her hands, not faint marks, clear signs of a struggle. And then came the evidence that turned suspicion into certainty: the phone records. Investigators discovered that between 7:31 and 7:37 p.m. on Christmas Eve, someone inside Mary's house dialed 7 calls in a row, to Karen's husband's office, then to his mobile. But the caller made one stupid, fatal mistake. Instead of using the code for Northern Ireland, they dialed the Republic's code. Every single call failed, never went through. That detail was damning. Someone had been inside Mary's house that evening, desperately trying to reach Karen's husband, and all the calls traced back to Mary's phone. There was no more doubt. Karen Ranklin was no longer a grieving witness. She was the prime suspect. At this point, the police were almost certain Karen was the killer. She and her husband were detained together, hoping for a direct confession, or at least some explanation that would tie her to the crime. But the shock came immediately. Karen acted completely stunned at being suspected. She kept repeating, disbelief in her voice. "Me? Kill Mary? Are you serious? On what basis? What motive? Why?" Yet the investigators were convinced she was lying. Each period of custody kept getting extended. 4 days, 8, 12, 15, 20, until it reached 25. And through all that time, everything seemed to point in one direction. Karen was the murderer. Then, something completely unexpected happened. The autopsy report arrived, and it flipped the case upside down. The report made one thing crystal clear: Karen did not kill Mary. The police couldn't believe it. How? Every lead had seemed to point to her. So how could forensic evidence rule her out? The answer was shocking. During the autopsy, doctors discovered internal bleeding and bruises on Mary's genital area. Even more disturbing, they concluded the sexual assault happened after death. In other words, the killer was male. Karen, being a woman, was cleared from suspicion. The focus immediately shifted back to finding a man. First in the spotlight was Karen's husband, but he was smart enough to protect himself. He admitted to police that his wife had indeed been at Mary's that night, and that she had asked him to say otherwise if questioned. But he refused to cover for her and told the truth. With that, he cleared himself of suspicion. Karen's image, however, wasn't exactly clean. Neighbors painted a disturbing picture. She was an alcohol user, her house always littered with bottles, despite having a young child. They described her as emotional, volatile, prone to angry outbursts. Even her husband complained to neighbors, calling her a woman who explodes when she drinks too much. The police faced a dilemma. Should they believe the neighbors' warnings of a dangerous, aggressive woman, or trust forensic evidence that clearly indicated a male perpetrator? Then, the final twist came from the crime lab. Further testing revealed something shocking. There was no DNA evidence, no semen, no real proof of sexual assault at all. The conclusion was unavoidable. The sexual assault had been staged. Someone had manipulated Mary's body to make it look like the crime was committed by a man. And who was the only person capable of that? Karen. She had orchestrated the scene herself, cleverly diverting suspicion and sending the police down the wrong path. But the ultimate question remained: why? What motive could drive a woman like Karen to commit such a horrific act? Mary was no enemy. There was no dispute between them. In fact, many of the elderly neighbors attested that Karen often helped them, checked on their medications, and showed particular care for the seniors. And even the witness who initially claimed her husband saw Karen that night recanted. She called the police again. "I don't want my testimony to send an innocent person to jail. Yes, I said what we thought we saw before. But in reality, we never saw Karen do anything wrong in our lives. Don't let our words convict her." And just like that, the case returned to square one. The police were left with two options: a suspicious, volatile woman, but no solid evidence against her; a brutal, mysterious murder, with no known killer. If you made it this far, hit that like button and drop a quick comment. It doesn't cost you anything, but it really helps a lot. Now let's get back to the story. As time passed, 7 long weeks later, on February 12, 2009, the awaited decision came. Karen was released on bail, £11,000 in cash, plus guarantees and assets worth another $55,000. Freedom, however, wasn't without strings. She was barred from approaching Newry, where the crime occurred. Her passport had to be surrendered. No contact with witnesses or Mary's family. Weekly check-ins with the police were mandatory, along with regular mental health evaluations and alcohol testing. Despite all these restrictions, it didn't take long for the police to notice suspicious behavior. By June 2009, authorities attempted to revoke her bail and return her to prison after discovering she was seeking a forged passport and even inquiring about cosmetic procedures to completely alter her facial features. The court, however, refused the police request, allowing her to remain at her home far from Newry. But neighbors weren't blind to what was happening behind closed doors. Karen blatantly ignored the conditions of her bail. They saw her drinking constantly and getting into violent fights with her husband, sometimes escalating to physical assault. Meanwhile, Mary's case remained in limbo. No concrete evidence. No fingerprints on the phone supposedly used by Karen. It seemed the defense might find a way to get her out of trouble, until the police dropped a bombshell that turned everything upside down. On October 4th, 2011, the major trial began at Belfast Crown Court. The police revealed the evidence that couldn't be ignored. Karen's DNA was found on Mary's body, on her chin, chest, hands, and legs. Some samples from the extremities were excluded due to technical issues, but the remaining evidence was shocking. The defense tried to spin it. The DNA is there because Karen kissed Mary on the cheek, hugged her warmly, and her traces were transferred. The police were ready. "All right," they countered. "Then how do you explain the presence of her DNA on the murder weapon? On that very metal cross used to bludgeon Mary to death?" And the investigators didn't stop there. They dropped another bomb on the defense. All of Mary's children testified unanimously. Their mother was a devout woman, strictly against alcohol in her home. "So how, Karen, did you bring a bottle of vodka inside? How is it that 3/4 of it was consumed straight from the bottle? It was glaringly obvious. That bottle wasn't a gift. It was yours. You came to drink it yourself, not to offer it to Mary." As the trial began, Karen's defense threw everything at the wall, trying to save her. One minute they questioned the DNA. The next they claimed there might have been no assault at all, just symptoms of old age in Mary. They even tossed out these wild theories without any real examination of the body. Mere words meant to plant doubt in the jury's mind. But the forensic biologist in court put it bluntly. The probability that the DNA on Mary's body came from anyone other than Karen is less than 1 in a billion. When the defense felt the walls closing in, they tried one last trick, claiming Karen might have committed the crime while unconscious from alcohol. The judge shut that down immediately, stating she was fully aware and in control. Then, Karen spoke for herself. She turned to the judge in courtroom, her voice steady. "How could I kill her? Mary was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. I had no reason to kill her." But the victim's attorney responded sharply. "Either she's the killer, or she's the unluckiest woman in the world, with all this evidence and coincidence stacked against her." After long debates, testimony, and evidence, the court pieced together that fateful night. Karen, forbidden from drinking by her husband, was obsessed with alcohol. She brought a bottle of vodka under the guise of gifting it to Mary, but in truth, she went there to drink it herself. She sat with Mary, opened the bottle, and began guzzling. With every sip, her anger boiled and control slipped away. Mary, the kind-hearted woman, didn't remain silent. She scolded Karen, reminding her of her own home, husband, child, and the religious prohibition against alcohol. Her words were honest, yet they wounded the drunken Karen deeply. In a moment of rage, Karen grabbed the cross and struck Mary, as if taking vengeance on the very faith that Mary had invoked. The defense tried to paint Karen as the victim until the last moment, but the truth was undeniable. The verdict came: life imprisonment, with a minimum of 20 years behind bars. Strangely, Karen showed no remorse, no reaction at all as the sentence was read. Her face remained stone-cold, unmoved, as if she didn't care. She was then taken to Hyde Bank Prison, known for housing the toughest female inmates in Northern Ireland. On January 7th, 2009, Mary was laid to rest, surrounded by a huge crowd. Not only her family and neighbors, but also the elementary school children she had loved and cared for. They stood to say their final goodbye. She was buried next to her husband, leaving behind a void no one could ever fill. Since that day, Newry was never the same. The once tranquil, close-knit neighborhood turned into a place shadowed by fear and suspicion. Neighbors who had once lived like one big family now eyed each other warily, as if their trust had been shattered forever. And that wraps up today's story. Don't forget to support us by subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button if you enjoyed this tale. And if you're a fan of mystery and true crime, I highly recommend checking out 2 other gripping stories. One is a murder and assault case that happened on New Year's Eve, and the culprit was an unexpected child. The second is about 5 children who disappeared on New Year's Eve, a case that baffled investigators for decades and remains unsolved to this day. Both stories are absolutely worth your time, so don't miss them. See you next time with an even darker and more thrilling story.